Hi, everybody, and happy Burns Night. I'd like to share with you a tale from the bard himself. This is the story of Tam O'Shanter, and it's set in the town of Ayr in Scotland, where Tam could often be found drinking and whiling away the hours of the night at one of the local drinking houses, much to his wife's displeasure. Tam liked nothing more than to sit with his good friend the cobbler in the smithy at their favourite drinking place, especially on weekends when the market had taken place. And his wife, Kate, had told him many a time he was nothing more than a waster and a drunken slob, and that if he didn't change his ways, one day he was going to wake up dead in the River Doon. But, do you think Tam paid any heed to what she had to say? No, he did not, and so he would just carry on in the normal way. On the night of our story, Tam found himself sitting in his favourite spot next to the fire at the local inn with his good friends around him. Oh, how the whiskey poured down, how the ale poured down, how the stories poured out, and how they laughed and sang all through that night. And as the night rolled on, Tam found himself closer and closer to the landlord's wife, and the two of them whispering away and getting all cosy like. Well, in the meantime, outside, the wind was blowing the clouds across the moon as a great storm was coming in, but nobody paid heed to that. Well, the hours rolled by like minutes, and at last it was time for Tam to take his leave and bid his friends farewell, and out into that rainy, dark night he made his way. And he climbed upon the back of his faithful mare, Meg, and he set off along the long, dark track back to his cottage and back to his wife, Kate. As Tam and Meg made their way along the dirt track, while the wind howled and the rain poured, the lightning flashed, lighting up the sky from pole to pole. As they made their way into the woods, it grew darker still, and Tam knew that these parts were haunted, and he kept an eye out just to make sure that they didn't get caught unawares by any of the ghosts that lay all about. Well, they rode through the ford, and as they did so, they came into the darker parts of the woods. And as they came through those woods, they could see the Alloway church up ahead, that old haunted churchyard, and there seemed to be light coming from the windows. And as they drew near, they could hear the sound of music playing. They could hear the sound of laughter. People were there, and they were dancing. Having tied up his horse, Tam made his way up to the church, and when he got there, well, he found a window where he could pull himself up. He pulled himself up to that ledge, and he peeped over and into that room. Oh, what a sight befell his eyes! The room was laid out with dozens of coffins, all of them open, and inside each of the coffins lay the corpse, dressed in the clothes in which it had been buried, and its outstretched hand held a candle, giving light to that room. And in the archway of the window opposite sat none other than Old Nick, the devil himself, a set of pipes under his arm, into which he pumped air, and he played upon the chanter. And out came jigs, and out came reels, and out came strathspeys. And as Tam looked on from his place at the window, he could see that the room was full of witches, ugly old hags, dancing around to the jigs and reels in their underskirts. Oh, what a sight it was! But there amongst them was one who was younger, prettier even, and more sprightly than all the others. It was none other than Maggie, and she was dancing around in her short skirt, known as a cutty sark in these parts. And as Tam watched on, transfixed, she danced there with all the other cackling sisters. Tam watched as she made her way around the room. Well, he was full of whiskey, he was full of ale, and his caution, well, that had been blown to the wind. And as she made her way past, he called out, "Oh, Maggie, well done, show us your cutty sark." And in that instant, silence fell upon the room. in the very next moment, the witches burst out through the windows. They burst out through the belfry. They burst out through the door. And into the night they came, screaming like banshees, like an angry swarm of wasps whose nest has just been kicked by a bear. And the moment that Tam O'Shanter saw them coming, he turned and he ran. He ran for his life. He ran with all his might down that church path between the gravestones, back towards the gate where an anxious Meg stood waiting. Meg needed no encouragement. No sooner was Tam upon her back than she leapt off in great bounds along that dark and lonely track, riding through the muck and through the mire, with each step getting closer to home, with each step getting closer to safety. But the witches were hot on her tail, with each step getting closer, screaming as they came. Maggie was closest of all, and she was fully intent on grabbing a hold of that mare's tail and pulling horse and rider down to the floor. But there was another witch known as Nanny, and she came in above and got ahead of Maggie and got her hands upon that horse's tail. And just as she did so, horse and rider rode onto the bridge across the river. And as we all know, witches cannot cross running water, and so they stopped in their tracks, and the horse, Meg, and her rider, Tam, rode on to safety. But in that moment, poof, horse had been separated from tail, and the witches, full of anger, Nanny held up that bleeding stump. But Tam and Meg were safely home. And that brings us to the end of our tale. But you should take heed, those of you that like the whiskey and like the ale, and take no heed of your wives' warnings. What befell poor Tam and Meg that dark and rainy night.